The trading station Nexus 7 floated in the void between star systems, a massive structure of metal and lights that served as neutral ground for dozens of species. In the lower levels, where the air was thick with smoke and the lighting dim, creatures from across the galaxy gathered to drink, trade, and share stories that would make civilized beings shudder. Captain HFY of the Vorthak Hunting Guild sat at his usual table, his reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his kind. The Vorthak were apex predators from a world where only the strongest survived, and they had turned their natural hunting instincts into a profitable business. They hunted the most dangerous game in the galaxy, selling trophies to collectors and meat to exotic restaurants. "Tell us again about the crystalline wasps of Kepler 442, urged Mordok, a younger Vorthak whose scales still bore the bright patterns of youth. "How many did you take down?" HFY's chest swelled with pride. 47 queens and their entire hive. The crystals from their wings alone fetched enough credits to buy a small moon. He gestured to the gleaming blue fragments embedded in his ceremonial armor. Each queen was the size of a shuttle, with stingers that could pierce battle armor. The assembled hunters murmured appreciatively. Crystalline wasps were legendary for their ferocity and the valuable minerals they incorporated into their bodies. Taking down even one was considered a significant achievement. "What about the shadow stalkers of Proxima?" asked another hunter, a four-armed Keltharian whose multiple eyes glittered with interest. "I heard you cleared out an entire pack." 12 of them, HFY confirmed. Invisible predators that could phase through solid matter. "Took me 3 months to develop the quantum nets needed to catch them. Their pelts are highly prized by the consortium nobility." As the evening wore on, the stories grew more elaborate. Each hunter tried to outdo the others with tales of increasingly dangerous prey. They spoke of acid-spitting behemoths from gas giant moons, telepathic predators that could drive their victims insane, and cybernetic war beasts left over from ancient conflicts. The conversation was interrupted by the soft hiss of the bar's entrance seal. A figure stepped through the doorway, immediately drawing attention despite their unremarkable appearance. The newcomer was human, a species most of the galaxy considered soft and weak. She was of average height with brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing practical clothing that showed signs of extensive use. The woman moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, her eyes scanning the room before settling on the hunter's table. Several of the more aggressive species growled or hissed as she passed, but she paid them no attention. She approached their table and stood silently, waiting. "What do you want, meat?" HFY snarled, using the derogatory term his species applied to mammals. "This table is for real hunters." The human's expression didn't change. "I heard you talking about your hunts. Impressive kills. More impressive than anything your soft species could manage," Mordok laughed. "Humans can barely handle their own planet's predators, let alone the monsters we face." "You might be surprised," the woman said quietly. She pulled out a chair and sat down without invitation. "I'm Elena Vasquez. I hunt too." The laughter around the table was immediate and harsh. The idea of a human hunter was absurd to them. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as a peaceful, if technologically advanced, species. They were traders, diplomats, engineers, but certainly not hunters. "What do you hunt, little human?" HFY asked mockingly. "Rodents? Your own livestock?" Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I hunt hunters." The laughter died abruptly. Several of the aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The phrase could mean many things, but in this context, surrounded by professional killers, the implication was clear. "Explain yourself," HFY demanded, his hand moving instinctively to the plasma cutter at his belt. "It's simple," Elena said, leaning back in her chair. "You hunt dangerous animals for sport and profit. I hunt dangerous people who hunt innocent beings for sport and profit. Slavers, pirates, those who kill for pleasure rather than necessity. Are you threatening us?" The Keltharian's forearms tensed, ready for violence. "Not at all," Elena replied calmly. "I'm just sharing stories like you were. For instance, last month I tracked down a gang of hegemony slavers who were raiding human colonies. They thought they were untouchable because they had military-grade weapons and ships. They were wrong." She reached into her jacket, causing several hunters to reach for their weapons, but she only pulled out a small device. She placed it on the table and activated it. A holographic display showed a ship's identification beacon. "The Bloody Fang," she said, flagship of the Ironclaw Syndicate. They specialized in capturing families from frontier worlds. The leader, A Vorthak named Kreshtar liked to make the parents watch as he decided which children would be sold and which would be used for entertainment. Zexhai recognized the name and ship. The Ironclaw Syndicate had been a powerful criminal organization until they mysteriously disappeared 6 months ago. No trace had ever been found of them or their ships. What happened to them? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. They learned that humans can be very dangerous when we're properly motivated, Elena said. Kreshtar in particular was surprised to discover that our soft species includes some very creative individuals when it comes to payback. The table fell silent. The implications of her words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. This small, seemingly harmless human was claiming responsibility for the destruction of one of the galaxy's most feared criminal organizations. Prove it, Mordok challenged, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Elena smiled again, and this time it was genuinely warm. Oh, I don't need to prove anything to you. You hunt animals. I hunt monsters. Our paths don't cross unless someone makes very poor choices. She stood up from the table, preparing to leave. As she turned away, Zexhai called out to her. Wait, he said. I have to ask. In all your hunting, how many have hunted you back? Elena paused, looking back over her shoulder. Her expression was thoughtful, almost sad. All of them, she said quietly. The difference is they never caught me. With that, she walked away, leaving the hunters staring after her in stunned silence. The celebration had lost all its energy, and one by one the aliens began to disperse, each lost in their own thoughts about predators and prey, and the thin line between hunter and hunted. 3 days after the encounter at Nexus 7, Elena Vasquez sat in the pilot's seat of her ship, the Retribution, reviewing intelligence reports on her datapad. The ship itself was unremarkable from the outside, designed to look like a standard cargo hauler. Inside, however, it was a sophisticated hunting platform equipped with advanced sensors, weapons, and tracking systems that would make a military vessel envious. Her current target was an operation run by the Zelkin Consortium, a group that specialized in hunting sentient beings for sport. Rich aliens from across the galaxy would pay enormous sums to participate in primitive hunts, where they would stalk and kill members of less technologically advanced species. The hunts were carefully organized to give the prey no real chance of escape or victory. Elena's research had led her to a remote system, where the consortium operated a hunting preserve on a planet they called Safari World. The planet's native population, a peaceful species called the Mithari, had been systematically captured and released as prey for the entertainment of wealthy sadists. The Mithari were humanoid, but smaller than humans, with large eyes adapted for their planet's dim light and delicate features that made them appear almost childlike. They were herbivores with a complex social structure based on harmony and cooperation. They had no weapons, no concept of warfare, and no defenses against the high-tech hunters who pursued them through their own forests. Elena had been tracking this operation for months, gathering intelligence and waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment was now approaching. According to her sources, a major hunt was scheduled to begin in 2 days, with several high-profile clients arriving to participate. Her communication system chimed, indicating an incoming message. The screen displayed the face of Marcus Chen, her contact within the Galactic Trade Federation's Intelligence Division. Elena, I've got the information you requested, Marcus said, his expression grim. The guest list for this hunt is a who's who of galactic scum. We're talking about crime bosses, corrupt officials, and some of the worst beings in known space. Good, Elena replied. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. What about security? That's where it gets complicated. They've hired the Apex Predator Guild as protection. These aren't just random thugs, Elena. They're professional killers with military training and top-tier equipment. Elena nodded. She had heard of the Apex Predator Guild. Unlike the hunters she had met at Nexus 7 who focused on dangerous animals, the guild specialized in eliminating threats to their clients. They were expensive, efficient, and completely without morals. How many? She asked. 50 confirmed, possibly more. They'll have air support, ground vehicles, and enough firepower to level a small city. And the Mithari? Marcus's expression darkened. 200 of them, including children. They're being held in containment facilities until the hunt begins. The clients like to select their prey personally. Elena felt the familiar cold anger settling in her chest. It was the same feeling she had experienced when she first learned about operations like this. When she realized that while humans struggled to find their place in the galaxy, other species were committing atrocities that made humanity's worst historical crimes seem petty by comparison. "I'll need a way onto the planet," she said. "Already arranged. There's a supply ship making a delivery tomorrow. I've made sure you'll be on the crew manifest as a maintenance technician. Once you're on the surface, you'll be on your own." "I always am," Elena replied. After ending the communication, Elena began her preparations. She had learned long ago that successful hunting required meticulous planning and the right tools for the job. She opened the sealed compartments in her ship's cargo hold, revealing an arsenal that most military units would envy. Her primary weapon was a modified plasma rifle capable of firing different types of ammunition depending on the target. For heavily armored opponents, she had armor-piercing rounds. For groups, she had explosive shells. For silent work, she had energy-dampened shots that made almost no sound. But weapons were only part of the equation. Elena's real advantage lay in her understanding of human psychology and tactics, applied to alien opponents who had never faced a human hunter. Most species in the galaxy had evolved along predictable lines, with strengths and weaknesses that could be cataloged and exploited. Humans were different. They were adaptable, unpredictable, and capable of learning from any situation. Elena spent the next several hours studying the layout of Safari World, memorizing terrain features, facility locations, and security protocols. She had obtained detailed maps through various channels, some legal, others less so. The hunting preserve covered an enormous area of forest and mountains, with the Mithari containment facilities located at the center. The consortium's clients would be staying at a luxury lodge equipped with every comfort imaginable. From there, they would be transported to starting positions around the preserve, where they would begin their hunt using advanced tracking equipment and weapons designed to wound rather than kill immediately. The goal was to make the hunt last as long as possible. Elena's plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. She would infiltrate the facility, eliminate the security forces, free the Mithari, and then deal with the clients. The challenge would be doing all of this before anyone could escape or call for reinforcements. As she worked, Elena thought about the question Zexhai had asked her at Nexus 7. How many had hunted her back? The answer was more complicated than she had let on. Every target she pursued eventually learned they were being hunted and tried to turn the tables. Some had come close to succeeding. There had been the hegemony admiral who had set a trap using captured human civilians as bait. Elena had walked into it knowingly, because she couldn't abandon innocent people and had barely escaped with her life. There had been the syndicate assassin who had tracked her across 3 star systems, always one step behind until Elena finally confronted him in the abandoned mining station. The fight had lasted for hours, moving through the station's twisted corridors, each trying to outmaneuver the other. But Elena had survived them all. And they hadn't, not because she was stronger or faster or better armed, but because she understood something they didn't. When humans hunted, they didn't just use weapons and tactics. They used something deeper, something that came from millions of years of evolutionary pressure. They used the part of themselves that remembered when humanity was prey, when they had to outwit predators that were bigger, stronger, and better equipped. The galaxy was full of apex predators who had never been prey. They had evolved at the top of their food chains, never needing to develop the cunning and adaptability that came from being hunted. Elena had learned to turn their own confidence against them, to use their assumptions about weak, soft humans as a weapon. The next morning, Elena docked with the supply ship and assumed her cover identity. The ship's crew, mostly humans with a few aliens, accepted her presence without question. The forged credentials Marcus had provided identified her as a specialist in atmospheric processing systems, a perfectly mundane job that would give her access to the facility's infrastructure. As the supply ship approached Safari World, Elena looked out at the planet's surface through the viewport. From orbit, it looked peaceful and beautiful, with vast forests and clean rivers. It was hard to believe that such a place had been turned into a killing ground for the entertainment of monsters. Soon, she would be among those monsters, pretending to be just another technician while she prepared to show them what it meant to be hunted by a human. The hunt was about to begin, but not the one they were expecting. The supply ship touched down at Safari World's main facility, just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landing pad. Elena carried a toolkit and wore the plain gray uniform of a maintenance worker, blending perfectly with the other technicians who disembarked to service the facility's systems. The complex was larger than she had expected, sprawling across several square kilometers of cleared forest. The central lodge where the client stayed was a magnificent structure of glass and exotic metals, designed to showcase the wealth and power of its occupants. Around it were smaller buildings housing security forces, support staff, and the administrative offices that coordinated the hunts. Elena's first priority was reconnaissance. She needed to understand the facility's layout, security patterns, and communication systems before making any moves. Her cover identity gave her access to maintenance areas throughout the complex, allowing her to move freely while gathering intelligence. As she worked on atmospheric processors and power systems, Elena observed the security forces. The Apex Predator Guild lived up to their reputation. They moved with military precision, maintained constant communication, and kept their weapons at ready. Their equipment was top tier, including powered armor, energy shields, and weapons that could punch through starship hulls. But Elena also noticed weaknesses. They were overconfident, treating this assignment as easy money rather than a serious threat. They had positioned themselves to protect against external attacks, not internal sabotage. Most importantly, they had no experience dealing with human tactics. During her second day at the facility, Elena encountered some of the consortium's clients. They had arrived throughout the day in luxury ships, each more ostentatious than the last. The beings who emerged were exactly what she had expected: wealthy predators from across the galaxy, who saw sentient life as nothing more than entertainment. There was Vorthak the Cruel, a hegemony general who had been responsible for the massacre of entire colonies before retiring to pursue his hobbies. The insectoid queen Zixara, whose hive had perfected torture techniques that kept victims alive and conscious for months. A cybernetically enhanced being called the Chrome Hunter, who collected the minds of his kills and replayed their death agonies for pleasure. Elena watched them from a distance as they toured the facility, selecting their prey from holographic displays like customers choosing items from a menu. The Mithari were categorized by age, size, and estimated survival skills. The clients discussed the relative merits of hunting families versus individuals, children versus adults, as if they were talking about different cuts of meat. That evening, Elena made her way to the Mithari holding area. The containment facility was located underground, accessible through service tunnels that she had mapped during her maintenance work. The area was heavily guarded, but the guards were positioned to prevent escape, not infiltration. Elena used her technical access codes to enter the facility's environmental control room. From there, she could observe the holding area through security cameras while remaining undetected. What she saw made her hands clench into fists. The Mithari were kept in large cages, dozens of families packed together in spaces barely large enough for half their number. The aliens looked exhausted and terrified, their large eyes reflecting the harsh artificial lighting. Children clung to their parents while adults tried to comfort each other despite their own fear. Elena counted 217 beings, ranging from elderly adults to children who couldn't have been more than a few years old. They had been taken from their homes, torn away from everything they knew, and brought here to be murdered for sport. She began planning her assault for the following night, when the hunt was scheduled to begin. The clients would be transported to starting positions around the preserve at dawn, giving her a window of opportunity when security would be focused on the hunt rather than the facility. Elena spent the rest of the night preparing. She retrieved her equipment from hidden locations around the facility, having smuggled it in piece by piece over the past 2 days. Her modified plasma rifle was disguised as diagnostic equipment. Her armor was concealed beneath maintenance coveralls. Her explosives were hidden inside tool containers. As dawn approached, Elena watched the preparations for the hunt from her position in the environmental control room. The clients were gathered in the lodge's main hall, being briefed on the rules of engagement. They were allowed to use any weapons they chose, but were encouraged to avoid immediately fatal shots. The goal was to create a prolonged chase that would provide maximum entertainment. The Mithari would be released in small groups throughout the preserve, given a 30-minute head start before the hunters began pursuit. Cameras positioned throughout the forest would broadcast the hunt to viewing screens in the lodge, allowing spectators to watch multiple kills simultaneously. Elena felt the familiar cold rage building inside her. These beings thought they were apex predators, but they had never encountered a human who was truly hunting them. They were about to learn the difference between killing helpless prey and facing a predator that fought back. At exactly 0600 hours, the hunt began. The clients were transported to their starting positions while the first group of Mathari was released into the preserve. Elena watched on the security monitors as the terrified aliens stumbled through the forest, struggling to find places to hide while advanced tracking systems locked onto their movements. Now it was Elena's turn to hunt. She began with the communication systems, introducing viruses she had designed to gradually degrade the facility's ability to coordinate its forces. The viruses would work slowly, making it appear that equipment was simply malfunctioning rather than being sabotaged. Next, she moved to the power grid. Elena began shutting down non-essential systems, starting with comfort features in the lodge and gradually working her way to more critical infrastructure. She wanted the facility's occupants to feel increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Her first direct action was against a security patrol in the lower levels. Elena had studied their routes and timing, identifying a blind spot where she could act without being observed. She waited in an access corridor until the two being patrol passed, then struck. The first guard went down to a neural disruptor that left him unconscious but alive. The second guard had time to reach for his weapon before Elena's plasma burst dropped him. She dragged both bodies into a maintenance room and took their communication devices and access codes. Now she could monitor security communications and track the movements of the remaining guards. Elena began a systematic campaign of psychological warfare, using her access to the facility's systems to create confusion and fear. Lights flickered in empty corridors. Doors opened and closed by themselves. Environmental systems created unexplained sounds and temperature fluctuations. Security cameras showed movement in areas where no one should be, then switched to static when guards arrived to investigate. The guards began reporting equipment malfunctions and possible intruders, but their commanders dismissed the reports as nerves and technical problems. The facility had operated without incident for years, and the idea that someone could infiltrate their security seemed impossible. Elena smiled grimly as she listened to their increasingly panicked communications. They were starting to understand that they were being hunted, but they had no idea by whom or how. The hunters were becoming the hunted, and they didn't like the feeling. The real hunt was just beginning. By midday, Elena had eliminated 6 more security guards and disabled half of the facility's surveillance network. The remaining guards were jumpy and disorganized, no longer maintaining their professional composure. Their communications were filled with nervous chatter and contradictory reports. Command: This is Patrol 7. We found Jenkins and Mortath unconscious in Maintenance Section C. No signs of struggle, no indication of what happened to them. Patrol 7, check for neural disruptor residue. Could be a technical malfunction with their equipment. Negative, Command. This looks deliberate. Someone's picking us off. Elena listened to their exchanges while working on the facility's main power distribution center. She had already rerouted power away from several critical systems, but now she needed to prepare for the final phase of her operation. Soon she would need to move quickly and decisively. In the preserve, the hunt was proceeding as planned from the client's perspective. The first group of Mathari had been cornered and killed within 2 hours, providing entertainment for the spectators in the lodge. A second group had been released, and the hunters were already tracking them through the forest. Elena watched the feeds from the preserve cameras, her anger growing with each act of cruelty she witnessed. The hunters deliberately wounded their prey to prolong the chase, using advanced medical scanners to ensure the injuries weren't immediately fatal. The Mathari ran through the forest, leaving trails of blood for the predators to follow. But the hunters' attention was focused on their game, making them vulnerable to a different kind of predator. Elena began moving toward the containment facility where the remaining Mathari were held. It was time to even the odds. The underground holding area was guarded by 8 members of the Apex Predator Guild, armed with military-grade weapons and wearing powered armor. They were positioned at strategic points throughout the facility. maintaining overlapping fields of fire and constant communication. Elena studied their positions from the environmental control room, identifying patterns in their patrol routes and communication schedules. The guards changed positions every 30 minutes, but there was a brief window during each rotation when certain areas were unobserved. She began her assault during one of these transitions, emerging from an air conditioning vent behind the guard station. The duty officer barely had time to register her presence before Elena's neural disruptor sent him into unconsciousness. She quickly accessed his control panel, shutting down internal sensors and locking down the facility's blast doors. The other guards immediately noticed the sensor blackout and began converging on the control station. Elena was ready for them. She had rigged explosive charges throughout the facility's support structure. Not enough to cause a collapse, but sufficient to create confusion and limit their movement. The first explosion rocked the facility as Guard Team Alpha reached the control station. The blast brought down part of the ceiling, separating the team and forcing them to find alternate routes. Elena used the confusion to relocate, moving through maintenance passages that only she knew how to access. All units, we have a confirmed hostile in the containment facility. The team leader's voice crackled over the communication system. Unknown number of assailants, possibly human. Implement lockdown protocols. Elena smiled at their assumption that multiple attackers were involved. Humans had a reputation for working in teams, and the guards couldn't conceive that a single individual could pose such a threat to their operation. She struck again from an unexpected direction, emerging from a ventilation shaft to eliminate two guards who were attempting to flank her last known position. Her plasma rifle made short work of their armor, and their sophisticated weapons were useless against an enemy they couldn't see coming. The remaining guards fell back to defensive positions around the holding area, forming a protective perimeter around the Mithari cages. It was exactly what Elena had hoped they would do. By concentrating their forces, they had made themselves vulnerable to the surprise she had prepared. Elena activated the facility's emergency protocols, triggering a controlled release of fire suppression gas throughout the containment area. The gas wasn't toxic, but it created a thick fog that negated the guards' visual targeting systems. Their thermal sensors were useless against Elena's modified armor, which included heat-dampening technology. Moving through the fog like a ghost, Elena systematically eliminated the remaining guards. They fired blindly into the mist, their sophisticated weapons useless against an enemy who could see them but remained invisible. One by one, they fell to precise plasma bursts or neural disruptor shots. When the fog finally cleared, Elena stood alone among the unconscious guards. She quickly moved to the control panel and began opening the Mithari cages. The aliens cowered at first, terrified by the sounds of battle they had heard. But Elena spoke to them in their own language, words she had learned during her preparation. "I am here to help you," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "I will get you away from this place." The Mithari stared at her in amazement. They had never seen a human before, but they understood that this strange being had somehow defeated their captors. An elderly Mithari who seemed to be a leader stepped forward. "You fight for us?" he asked in accented galactic standard. "Why?" "Because it's right," Elena replied simply. "Because someone has to." She led the Mithari through the facility's service tunnels toward the surface, avoiding areas where security forces might still be active. The aliens moved quietly, their natural stealth serving them well in the confined spaces. As they emerged into the main facility, Elena's communication device crackled with transmissions from the preserve. The clients had noticed that the facility's communication systems were failing and were demanding to know what was happening. Some were already calling for extraction, their confidence shaken by the technical difficulties. "Command, this is Vorthak. My communication link to the facility keeps cutting out. What's your status?" "Unknown, General. We're experiencing technical difficulties across multiple systems. Recommend you maintain position until we resolve the issues." "Technical difficulties? What kind of technical difficulties? I didn't pay 50 million credits to deal with amateur hour operations." Elena smiled grimly. The clients were starting to panic, but their real terror hadn't even begun yet. She still had plans for the beings who thought hunting sentient creatures was entertainment. She activated a general broadcast to all communication devices in the facility, including those carried by the clients in the preserve. Her voice echoed through speakers and communication units across the entire complex. "Attention, hunting enthusiasts," she said. her voice carrying a cold edge that made several listeners shiver. "This is Elena Vasquez, and I have some bad news for you. Your prey has been liberated. Your security forces have been neutralized. Your facility is under new management." Silence followed her announcement, broken only by the sound of panicked breathing over open communication channels. "You came here to hunt," Elena continued. "Well, congratulations. You're about to experience what it feels like to be prey. The difference is when I hunt you, it won't be for sport. It will be for justice." In the preserve, the clients looked around nervously, their confidence evaporating as they realized their situation had fundamentally changed. They were no longer the hunters in this scenario. They were about to become the hunted. Panic spread through the preserve like wildfire after Elena's announcement. The wealthy clients who had come to Safari World for entertainment found themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own making. Their communication devices buzzed with frantic calls as they tried to contact their security details, their ships, anyone who could extract them from their suddenly dangerous situation. Elena had anticipated their response. Before making her announcement, she had disabled the facility's long-range communication array and activated a jamming field that prevented any signals from reaching orbit. The client's ships were effectively cut off, unable to receive distress calls or provide assistance. She led the freed Mithari to a secure area in the facility's upper levels, where they would be safe while she dealt with the remaining threats. The aliens were still in shock, unable to fully comprehend that their nightmare was ending, but they trusted the strange human who had rescued them from certain death. "Stay here," Elena told their leader. "Don't leave this area until I return. There are still dangerous beings in the preserve, and I need to deal with them." "Will you kill them?" the elderly Mithari asked, his large eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and concern. Elena considered the question carefully. These beings had paid enormous sums to hunt and kill innocent creatures for pleasure. They had tortured and murdered countless sentients across the galaxy. By any reasonable standard, they deserved death. "Some of them," she said finally. "The ones who fight back, who try to harm others. But I'm not like them. I don't kill for pleasure." She gathered her equipment and prepared to enter the preserve. The hunting ground covered thousands of square kilometers of dense forest, mountains, and rivers. Tracking down all the clients would take time, but Elena had advantages they didn't know about. During her reconnaissance, she had planted sensor devices throughout the preserve, tiny instruments that could detect movement, heat signatures, and communication signals. Now those sensors fed information directly to her tactical display, showing her the location of every client and their remaining security escorts. Elena chose her first target carefully. The Chrome Hunter was moving through a section of forest about 5 kilometers from the facility, accompanied by 2 bodyguards. The cybernetically enhanced being had a reputation for extreme cruelty, and his collection of stored victim personalities made him particularly dangerous. If he escaped, he would continue his crimes elsewhere. She moved through the forest like a shadow, using skills learned from Earth's most dangerous predators and refined through years of hunting in alien environments. The preserve's dense canopy provided excellent cover, and Elena's modified equipment allowed her to move without triggering the sensor networks the clients relied on. The Chrome Hunter was following a blood trail left by wounded Mithari, his enhanced senses tracking the scent while his bodyguard scanned for threats. He was confident in his abilities, augmented beyond normal biological limits with reflexes faster than any unmodified being could match. But Elena wasn't unmodified. Her own enhancements were subtle, designed to appear natural while providing crucial advantages. Enhanced reflexes, improved sensory processing, and neural interfaces that allowed her to control her equipment through thought alone. She struck from above, dropping from the forest canopy onto one of the bodyguards while simultaneously firing at the other. Both guards went down before they could raise an alarm, leaving the Chrome Hunter alone and confused. "Show yourself," the cybernetic being called out, his artificial voice echoing through the forest. "I know you're there, human. I can smell your fear." Elena laughed, the sound seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Fear, you're the one who should be afraid. You're alone in hostile territory, being hunted by someone who knows these woods better than you do." The Chrome Hunter spun around, trying to locate the source of her voice, but Elena was already moving. She had learned to use the forest itself as a weapon, turning natural features into tactical advantages. A snare made from native vines caught the Chrome Hunter's leg, sending him crashing to the ground. Before he could regain his footing, Elena emerged from behind a massive tree trunk, her plasma rifle aimed at his head. "You collected mines," she said, her voice cold with disgust. "How many innocents are trapped in that mechanical skull of yours?" "Hundreds," the Chrome Hunter replied, a sick pride evident in his artificial voice. "Their dying thoughts are quite entertaining. Would you like to join them?" Instead of answering, Elena fired. The plasma burst overwhelmed the Chrome Hunter's defensive systems, leaving only smoking metal and circuits where his head had been. She used a specialized device to extract and destroy his memory storage units, finally freeing the minds he had imprisoned. Her communication device buzzed with transmissions from the other clients. Word of the Chrome Hunter's death had somehow reached them, increasing their panic and desperation. "This is General Vorthak," came a transmission on the emergency frequency. "I demand immediate extraction. This operation has been compromised." "Negative, General," Elena replied, having taken control of the communication system. "Extraction is not available. The hunt continues, but now you're the prey." Elena's next target was Queen Zixara, the insectoid ruler whose hive had perfected torture techniques. The queen had positioned herself in a defensive location near a rocky outcropping, surrounded by the remaining security forces who had rallied to protect their most valuable client. The queen's natural abilities made her a formidable opponent. Her species could secrete paralytic toxins, and her chitinous exoskeleton was naturally armored. More dangerous still was her telepathic ability to command other insectoid species, several of which served as her personal guards. Elena approached the position carefully, using her sensors to map the defensive perimeter. The guards had set up overlapping fields of fire and motion detectors, creating a killing zone around their position. Any direct assault would be suicide. But Elena didn't plan a direct assault. Instead, she began a campaign of psychological warfare designed to exploit the specific fears and weaknesses of each species present. She used the preserved sound system to broadcast the hunting calls of the guards' natural predators, sounds that triggered deep evolutionary responses. The insectoid guards became agitated as the sounds of their species' ancient enemies echoed through the forest. Their formation began to break down as instinct overrode training. Elena used the confusion to plant explosive charges around their position, creating a trap that would activate when they tried to flee. "Human." Queen Zixara's mental voice cut through Elena's mind like a blade. "I know you can hear me. Come face me directly if you have the courage." Elena smiled grimly. The queen's telepathic abilities were impressive, but humans had developed strong mental defenses during their evolution. The ability to resist mental intrusion was one of the traits that made humans dangerous to psychic species. "I'm already facing you," Elena replied through the communication system. "You just can't see me yet." She activated the explosive charges simultaneously, creating a series of controlled detonations that collapsed part of the rocky outcropping. The guards scattered in panic, running directly into the secondary traps Elena had prepared. Neural nets and stun mines eliminated most of them without lethal force, leaving only the queen and her most loyal bodyguards. Queen Zixara emerged from the rubble, her exoskeleton cracked but still functional. Her compound eyes scanned the forest, searching for her tormentor while her remaining guards formed a protective circle around her. Elena struck from an unexpected angle, using a grappling line to swing down from the forest canopy like an avenging angel. Her plasma rifle took out 2 guards before she landed, and her sidearm eliminated a third as she rolled to cover behind a fallen log. The queen rushed toward Elena's position, her claws extended and toxin sacs swollen with deadly chemicals. But Elena was already moving, using her enhanced reflexes to stay one step ahead of the aliens' attacks. The battle was brief, but intense. Queen Zixara's natural weapons were deadly, but Elena's human adaptability gave her the edge she needed. When the queen tried to use her telepathic abilities to disorient her opponent, Elena's mental defenses held firm. When the queen relied on her armored exoskeleton, Elena found the weak points that evolution had hidden. The final blow came when Elena used the queen's own aggressive nature against her. She feinted left, drawing the alien into an overextended attack, then struck at the nerve cluster behind the queen's primary eyes. The queen collapsed, her nervous system overloaded by Elena's neural disruptor. "Your hive's torture techniques end with you," Elena said, standing over the fallen queen. The beings you hurt will finally have justice. With two of the most dangerous clients eliminated, Elena turned her attention to the remaining hunters. General Vorthak had fortified himself in a clearing with his remaining security detail, while several other clients had scattered throughout the preserve in a desperate attempt to avoid Elena's hunt. But Elena was patient. She had time on her side, and her enemies were trapped in an environment where every advantage belonged to her. The preserve that had been designed as a killing ground for innocent prey had become a prison for the predators who had created it. Night transformed the preserve into Elena's domain. While her remaining targets huddled in whatever shelter they could find, she moved through the darkness like a force of nature. The forest that had once been their hunting ground was now her weapon, every shadow and sound serving her purpose. General Vorthak had established his position in a defensible clearing, using his military experience to create overlapping fields of fire and fallback positions. The hegemony general was no fool. He had survived dozens of battles across the galaxy and understood tactics better than any of the other clients. Elena observed his position through her night vision scope, studying the defensive arrangement. Vorthak had arranged his remaining guards in a classic military formation, with sentries posted at key observation points and heavy weapons covering the approaches. It was a textbook defensive position that would have stopped most attackers, but Elena wasn't most attackers. She was human, and humans had learned to wage war in ways that other species couldn't comprehend. She began with psychological warfare, using the preserve's sound system to broadcast recordings she had made during her earlier encounters. The death screams of the Chrome Hunter echoed through the forest, followed by Queen Zixara's final telepathic cry of anguish. The sounds carried clearly to Vorthak's position, where the remaining guards shifted nervously. "It's just noise," Vorthak growled to his troops. "The human is trying to frighten us. Hold your positions and maintain discipline." But Elena could see through her sensors that the general's own heart rate had increased. Despite his words, he was beginning to understand that this was no ordinary opponent. The systematic elimination of his fellow clients had shown him that he was dealing with a predator who operated by rules he didn't understand. Elena's next move was to cut off their water supply. She had located the stream that fed into their defensive position and introduced a harmless but foul-tasting chemical that made the water undrinkable. It was a subtle form of siege warfare that would gradually weaken their position without direct confrontation. Then she began picking off the sentries. Elena moved through the forest like a ghost, using natural cover and her enhanced equipment to approach undetected. Each guard she eliminated was taken quietly, their comrades unaware that their perimeter was being systematically compromised. The first sentry disappeared during a routine patrol, his communication device found later with no sign of struggle. The second vanished from his observation post, leaving only an empty chair and a plasma rifle. By the time Vorthak realized what was happening, half of his outer defenses had been neutralized. "Close the perimeter," the general ordered. "Fall back to the inner defensive ring. She's picking us off one by one." Elena smiled as she listened to their communications. Vorthak was a competent military commander, but he was thinking in terms of conventional warfare. He expected his enemy to mass forces for a decisive assault, to follow the established rules of engagement that govern civilized conflict. Instead, Elena continued her patient campaign of attrition. She used the preserve's automated systems against them, reprogramming maintenance drones to create distractions and false sensor readings. She planted small explosive charges that created loud noises but little damage, forcing the guards to investigate phantom threats while she maneuvered into position. As dawn approached, Vorthak found himself down to just 3 guards in an increasingly untenable position. The general's military experience told him to attempt a breakout, to try to reach a more defensible location or fight his way to an extraction point. "Sir," one of his remaining guards said nervously, "perhaps we should try to negotiate. The human said she doesn't kill for pleasure. Maybe we can reach some kind of arrangement." Vorthak's response was swift and brutal. His sidearm vaporized the guard who had suggested surrender, sending a clear message to the others about what he thought of negotiation. "We are soldiers of the hegemony," he declared. "We do not surrender to inferior species no matter how clever they think they are." Elena heard the exchange through her surveillance equipment and felt a cold satisfaction. Vorthak had just demonstrated exactly why he deserved no mercy. His casual murder of his own subordinate revealed the casual cruelty that had made him wealthy enough to afford this hunting expedition. She decided it was time to end the siege. Elena had been patient, but the remaining clients scattered throughout the preserve still needed to be dealt with, and she couldn't spend all day on one target. The assault began at dawn, just as Vorthak's remaining guards were at their most tired and demoralized. Elena struck from multiple directions simultaneously, using holographic projectors to create false images of herself while attacking from unexpected angles. Plasma bursts erupted from the forest, targeting the guards' positions with precision, guided by her advanced targeting systems. Vorthak's defensive arrangement collapsed within minutes as his remaining troops found themselves under attack from enemies they couldn't see or effectively counter. The general himself proved more resilient than his guards. When Elena finally faced him directly in the center of the clearing, he was armed with military-grade weapons and wearing powered armor that had seen action in a dozen conflicts. "So," Vorthak said, his voice distorted by his armor's speakers, "the soft little human finally shows herself. I've killed thousands of your kind, child. You're nothing special." "Maybe not," Elena replied, checking her weapon systems, "but I'm the last thing you're going to see." The battle was intense but brief. Vorthak was a skilled warrior with superior equipment, but Elena had spent years perfecting techniques specifically designed to counter military-trained opponents. She used the general's own aggression and confidence against him, drawing him into attacks that left him vulnerable to counterstrikes. When Vorthak's armor was breached and his weapon systems failed, he found himself face to face with the human he had underestimated. Elena stood over him, her plasma rifle aimed at his head, waiting for him to accept his defeat. "You know what the difference is between you and me?" Elena asked. "You kill because you enjoy it. I kill because sometimes it's necessary." Vorthak's final words were a string of curses in several languages, cut short by Elena's precise shot. With the most dangerous clients eliminated, Elena turned her attention to the remaining hunters scattered throughout the preserve. Most were wealthy dilettantes with no real combat experience, beings who had paid for the privilege of hunting helpless prey but had no idea how to handle a real threat. She found them hiding in caves, trying to swim across rivers or attempting to build shelters in the deep forest. Some begged for mercy when she found them. Others tried to buy their way out with offers of wealth and power. A few attempted to fight, but they were no match for someone who had made hunting killers her life's work. Elena wasn't vindictive in her methods. Those who surrendered and showed genuine remorse for their actions were left alive, but stripped of their equipment and communications. They would have to survive in the preserve using only their natural abilities, learning firsthand what it felt like to be hunted. Those who showed no remorse, who threatened to continue their crimes if released, met swifter ends. Elena had learned long ago that some beings couldn't be reformed or reasoned with. They understood only power, and she was prepared to speak their language. As the sun set on her second day in the preserve, Elena had accounted for all but one of the clients. The last hunter was the most elusive, a being known as the Shadow Merchant who specialized in acquiring rare prey for his customers. He was still somewhere in the preserve, and Elena intended to find him before she left Safari World. The hunt was almost over, but Elena's work was not yet complete. The Shadow Merchant was Elena's most challenging target. Unlike the other clients who had come to Safari World for sport, he was a professional. His species, the Umbral, were natural shapeshifters who could blend seamlessly with their environment. He had built his fortune by acquiring rare sentient beings for collectors across the galaxy, using his natural abilities to infiltrate secure locations and steal away his targets. Elena had been tracking him for hours without success. Her sensors detected movement in the deep forest, but every time she investigated, she found only ordinary wildlife. The Shadow Merchant was using his abilities to remain invisible, moving through the preserve like a ghost while seeking an opportunity to escape or turn the tables on his hunter. As night fell again, Elena changed her tactics. Instead of pursuing the Shadow Merchant directly, she decided to make him come to her. She returned to the facility where the rescued Mithari were sheltering, knowing that the Shadow Merchant would eventually try to recapture some of them. Beings like him couldn't resist valuable prey, even when they were being hunted themselves. Elena positioned herself in the facility's observation deck, using night vision equipment to monitor the surrounding area. The Mithari were safe in their secured location, but she made it appear that they were less protected than they actually were. She wanted the Shadow Merchant to think he had an opportunity. Her patience was rewarded near midnight when her motion sensors detected an anomaly in the facility's lower levels. Something was moving through the corridors, but it didn't register on visual sensors. Only the slight air displacement and thermal variations gave away the Shadow Merchant's presence. Elena smiled grimly. The Umbral's shape-shifting abilities were impressive, but they had one weakness that few beings knew about. Their cellular structure generated a unique electromagnetic signature that was difficult to detect but impossible to completely hide. She had equipped herself with specialized sensors designed to track that signature, technology originally developed by human scientists studying cloaking devices. The Shadow Merchant thought he was invisible, but Elena could follow his every movement through the facility. The alien was heading toward the Mithari's location, moving with the confidence of a predator who believed himself undetected. Elena allowed him to get close to his target before making her presence known. "That's far enough," she said, stepping out of an alcove with her weapon trained on what appeared to be empty air. The Shadow Merchant materialized, his form shifting from transparency to solid matter in a display that would have impressed any observer. He was tall and thin, with features that seemed to flow like liquid even in his solid state. "Impressive," he said, his voice carrying an odd harmonic quality. "Most beings cannot detect my presence. You are more resourceful than I anticipated." "I've had practice hunting things that don't want to be found," Elena replied. "You're not the first invisible killer I've dealt with." "Killer?" The Shadow Merchant seemed genuinely surprised. "I am no killer, human. I am a businessman. I acquire rare specimens for collectors who appreciate their unique qualities." "You kidnap sentient beings and sell them as slaves," Elena corrected. "The fact that you use euphemisms doesn't change what you are." The Shadow Merchant's form began to shift slightly, his edges becoming less distinct. Elena recognized the signs of an umbral preparing to fade back into invisibility. "I wouldn't try that," she warned. "I have weapons that work just as well against invisible targets as visible ones." "Perhaps we can reach an arrangement," the Shadow Merchant suggested. "I have access to incredible wealth, rare artifacts, information that could benefit someone in your profession. Surely that's worth more than whatever satisfaction you might gain from eliminating me." Elena considered his offer for exactly 1 second. "You know what? You're right. There is something I want from you." The Shadow Merchant's form solidified completely as hope entered his voice. "Excellent. What do you require? Credits, technology? I have connections throughout the galaxy." "Information," Elena said. "I want the names and locations of everyone you've sold sentient beings to. Every client, every middleman, every facility you've used. Complete records of your entire operation." "Impossible," the Shadow Merchant replied immediately. "That information would destroy my business, ruin my reputation. My clients paid for discretion as much as for my services." "Then you're no use to me," Elena said, raising her weapon. "Wait." The alien's form became more solid as panic set in. "Perhaps we can negotiate. Some information in exchange for my freedom. A partial list of my less important clients." Elena shook her head. "All or nothing. You've built your fortune on the suffering of innocent beings. Either you help me find every one of your victims and clients, or you face the consequences of your choices." The Shadow Merchant's form began to shift again, but this time toward a more aggressive configuration. His limbs extended and sharpened, becoming weapon-like appendages designed for close combat. "You underestimate me, human," he hissed. "I have survived in this business for centuries. I did not reach my position by surrendering to self-righteous hunters." The battle that followed was unlike any Elena had fought before. The Shadow Merchant could alter his form at will, shifting between solid and gaseous states, extending his limbs to attack from impossible angles, and even splitting his mass to attack from multiple directions. But Elena had advantages too. Her enhanced reflexes allowed her to track the alien's movements even when he was shifting forms, and her weapons were designed to be effective against both solid and energy targets. More importantly, she understood something the Shadow Merchant didn't. Humans were persistence hunters. They might not be the fastest or strongest predators, but they never gave up. Elena had been hunting killers for years, and she had developed an almost supernatural patience when it came to wearing down her targets. The Shadow Merchant's shape-shifting abilities were impressive, but they required enormous amounts of energy. Each transformation, each split, each phase shift drained his resources. Elena simply had to outlast him. She fell back through the facility, drawing the Shadow Merchant into a running battle that favored her human endurance over his alien abilities. With each exchange, he became slightly slower, slightly less coordinated as his energy reserves depleted. The end came in the facility's main corridor. The Shadow Merchant attempted one final transformation, trying to become a gas to escape through the ventilation system, but his exhausted cells couldn't maintain the change, and he partially solidified while still airborne. Elena's shot caught him in that vulnerable moment, her plasma burst disrupting his cellular cohesion and sending him crashing to the floor in his natural form. "The information," Elena said, standing over the defeated alien. "Your complete client list, or I leave you here for the authorities to find." Faced with the choice between death and exposure, the Shadow Merchant chose survival. He provided Elena with access codes to his hidden databases, records that would lead her to dozens of other criminals and hundreds of victims still held in captivity. With the Shadow Merchant defeated, Elena's work at Safari World was complete. She contacted Marcus Chen to arrange for the extraction of the rescued Mithari and the cleanup of the facility. The surviving clients would face justice through legal channels, while those who had died would serve as warnings to others who profited from the suffering of innocence. As Elena prepared to leave Safari World, she thought about the questions Xi had asked her at Nexus 7. How many had hunted her back? The answer was still the same. All of them. But each hunt taught her something new about the nature of predators and prey, about the thin line between civilization and savagery. The galaxy was full of monsters wearing civilized faces, beings who thought their wealth and power placed them above justice. Elena would continue hunting them, using the very qualities that made humans seem weak to other species. Their adaptability, their persistence, their refusal to accept that some things couldn't be changed. She was the human who hunted hunters, and her work was far from over. Somewhere in the vast galaxy, other innocents were suffering at the hands of predators who thought themselves untouchable. Elena would find them, one by one, and show them what it meant to be hunted by someone who understood that justice was sometimes a personal responsibility. The retribution lifted off from Safari World as the first rescue ships arrived to collect the freed Mithari. Elena set course for her next destination, already planning her next hunt. The Shadow Merchant's records had given her enough targets to keep her busy for years. Behind her, Safari World burned as authorities destroyed the hunting preserve and all evidence of the atrocities committed there. The Mithari would return to their homeworld, free to live their lives without fear of being hunted for sport. And somewhere in the galaxy, the next group of predators would learn that there was something more dangerous than any apex predator. There was a human who had decided that some hunts were worth everything, and who would never stop pursuing those who preyed on the innocent. The hunt never ended. It only found new prey.